Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free
Welcome to a live stream of the Jaybefaunt channel. I am your host, JamesBFauntleroy. So good to see all of you here on this gorgeous, beautiful Thursday. It's Thanksgiving Day, absolutely. So a lot of you guys are probably eating dinner right now, or you're stuffing your face with some turkey or something, or some of you aren't celebrating for specific reasons. And so I just want to welcome you all here today. The Jaybefaunt channel is also part of Revolutionary Blackout Network, so you can find me there on Thursdays for the Savvy and JB show, and for Sundays for the JB show. And you can find me here typically on Tuesdays at 2. So good to see all of you here joining me today. Also, just wanted to say a shout out to all of you that are watching. I know it is probably not the typical day to watch any streams, but I decided to do it today because, hey, there's free time and why not? So just if you guys have not already, go ahead and give a like to the stream. Appreciate it very much. It means the most to me. So thank you so very much. If you guys have not already, you guys can also subscribe to my Substack at Jaybefaunt.substack.com. This gives you email notifications whenever I go live, upload clips, or write any articles. So thank you so very much. Also, if you would like to ask me any questions for a video response, you guys can actually send it to me through QBounty. Yes, you guys can go to QBounty at qbounty.com/Jaybefaunt. I send and I will give you either a reaction to a video that you want me to react to, or I can also do a response to any questions that you guys would like a video response to. So thank you very much for that. Also, just to let you guys know, the holidays are coming up. So if you would like to gift a Patreon membership, you can always gift a Patreon membership at patreon.com/Jaybefaunt/gift. So thank you very much for that right there. So saying hello to some of the people who are in the chat. We got CBC Voter saying hello. Good to see a CBC Voter. Nice to have you in the chat joining for this stream. Anybody that's watching in YouTube, Rockfin, Rumble, good to see all of you here. Now, what are we doing? We are going to be doing a reading. We're going to be doing a reading live from Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents, from Margaret Kimberly. And one of the reasons why I think this is very apropos is because we're talking about genocide, but the genocide of people of this land. And so, of course, some people, they may not realize about the genocide that's happened, and from what the American presidents have actually been perpetuating for the last almost 250 years. So with that said, we're going to be getting into Prejudential by Margaret Kimberly. And so we're going to be starting on part 8, right? So it's the 8th president of the United States, and we're going to be doing parts 8 to 11. And we're going to be starting off with Martin Van Buren. So you guys see there, Martin Van Buren. That's what he looks like. He looks like Bernie Sanders on steroids. Yeah, he looks like Bernie Sanders on steroids. So want to get into it? I hope you guys got your tea. I got mine. And if you're asleep and you got the itis, that's okay too. But let's get into this. Martin Van Buren was born in the Hudson Valley of New York into a slaveholding family. His father, Abraham, owned 6 enslaved people. The future president owned one himself, a man named Tom. Tom managed to escape to Canada in 1821. but in 1822, he was discovered living in Worcester, Massachusetts. Van Buren agreed to sell him to the person who found him for $50 if he could capture him without violence. The buyer could not commit to doing so, so Van Buren never paid. Tom remained a free man. At an 1821 constitutional convention, the then Senator Van Buren supported giving the franchise to those few free black men who had a minimum of $250 worth of property. This vote was used against him when he ran for president. To garner Southern support, he explicitly denied being an abolitionist. He claimed to think slavery was wrong, but took the position that tampering with the institution was unconstitutional, declaring himself the inflexible and uncompromising opponent of any attempt on the part of Congress to abolish slavery in the District of Columbia against the wishes of the slaveholding states, and also with the determination equally decided to resist the slightest interference with it in the states where it exists. This argument was typical at the time and allowed him to be considered anti-slavery without being called an abolitionist. He called slaveholders sincere friends to the happiness of mankind and published a pamphlet opposing abolition. He supported efforts to ban abolitionist literature from the mail and the gag rule, which prohibited any debate on slavery from taking place in Congress. He not only looks like Bernie Sanders, but he acts like Bernie Sanders. I'm going to tell you why. So Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist, right? And he speaks against capitalism. Yet he does not oppose capitalism. Like, he'll put guardrails on capitalism. He'll try to put a bridle on capitalism, but he doesn't actually oppose it in the material sense of the word. He says things like, well, if you make a great invention, then make your billions, but pay your fair share. There is no fair share when it comes to billionaires. Ooh, that's some bar. I need to write that down. There is no fair share when it comes to billionaires. Ooh, let me write that down so I can make that into some merch. Hang on. Hold up. Wait a minute. Wait, there is no fair share when it comes to billionaires. Ooh, there is no fair share when it comes to billionaires. Ooh, I like that. Sometimes you got to write stuff down as soon as you find out because, you might miss it. Anyway, but when Bernie Sanders basically says that he basically is ceding ground to billionaires and their theft of surplus value legitimacy. There is no legitimacy to theft. And that's what Bernie Sanders does. And so basically here we have Martin Van Buren basically saying, oh yeah, slavery is wrong, but we can't go against the institution. It's almost like, well, it's been here this entire time. We might as well keep it. I mean, yeah, we know it's wrong, but we don't want to get rid of the institution. It's like, just because it's an institution or just because it's a tradition doesn't make it right. That's kind of the theme for today. Just because something is institutionalized doesn't make it right. Just because something's tradition doesn't mean it holds a proper and moral and ethical place within our society. Slavery was an institution, but did it make it right? Capitalism is not conducive for human survival, for humans to thrive, or for us as morally, because you're literally extracting surplus value, the wealth from the lower masses and giving it to a very small minority at the top. That's immoral. That is unethical. And yet somebody like a Bernie Sanders and somebody like a Martin Van Buren would say rhetorically that it's bad. But then when it comes to actually fighting against it, they don't have the guts. So let's continue, shall we? Van Buren was a typical Northern Democrat. He bent over backwards to mollify the slaveocracy. Slavery could not be contained because the slaveholders used every means to make sure that it spread. That is why Van Buren continued the removal of Indian tribes from the Southeast, asserting that it had been steadily preserved in by every succeeding president and may be considered the settled policy of the country. So even though it's wrong and we did it, hey, it's settled policy. We just got to keep doing it. Slavery could not thrive if the Southeast remained in the hands of the indigenous people. The plan was straightforward. First, remove Indians from their land, then secure the plantation economy throughout the Southeast. Makes you think about what they're trying to do in occupied Palestine, right? If they get rid of all the Palestinians, what's going to happen? Do you really think there's going to be freedom in that region? They're mighty close to Africa. In 1839, Van Buren attempted to intervene against the cause of freedom in a case of the Amistad. The enslaved people on board the ship had been kidnapped in Africa and taken to Cuba. They seized the ship in an insurrection and attempted to sail home, but they were captured in U.S. waters. The Spanish government demanded to return the ship and its human property to Cuba, and Van Buren was more than ready to comply, seeking a court order extraditing the mutineers and appealing with a federal district court ruled against the extradition. When the Supreme Court ruled that the captives must be freed, as the international slave trade had long since been illegal in the United States, Van Buren prepared to capture the newly freed people secretly and to provide legal counsel to the surviving Spanish sailors. Though its preparation was in vain, Van Buren's stance on Amistad case wasn't surprising. He was a true doughface, a name for a pro-slavery Northerner. He wasn't the last one to become president either. So yeah, that's Martin Van Buren. See, there's a lot of presidents that you're going to see that are like Bernie Sanders, where they'll say the right things, but when it comes to the rubber meets the road, it just does not pan out. And the funny part here is this part. It says, when the Supreme Court ruled that the captives must be freed, as the international slave trade has long since been illegal in the United States. If you make something illegal because you think it's wrong, that means because you thought it was wrong at that point in time. If slavery was made illegal, especially in countries like Mexico and Britain, that means that the United States knew it was wrong at the time that they were doing it. And so people can't say, oh, well, that was just the time, we didn't know any better. No, they knew better. They knew chattel slavery was wrong. They were just able to get away with it. Just like they knew genocide was wrong, but they're still able to get away with it. Let's move on to the next president, part 9. William Henry Harrison. All right, let's talk about Billy Harrison. Interesting. It's not our first, William. Certainly won't be our last. 1841. William Henry Harrison served the shortest term in office of any American president. He died just 31 days after his inauguration. Oh, wow. We could be so lucky. His speech was long, evidently too long for a cold, rainy day, and he died from complications of pneumonia 1 month later. Harrison lacks any presidential legacy, but he looms large because of his actions prior to taking office. He is a key figure in history of America's extermination of the Indian population and his attempts to expand slavery to those areas where the indigenous population has been decimated. Harrison was a bastard. Harrison was a Virginian. He was the son of a slaveholding farmer who was among the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Initially a student of medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, he joined the army after his father's death. And it was there that Harrison first gained notoriety. Early 1800s, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and northeastern Minnesota constituted the western frontier of the white American settlement. For most white Americans, there was no frontier. Step by step, they invaded and occupied every region of the indigenous people's country, from sea to shining sea, from the river to the sea. Pattern recognition. Do you see it? Remember the video I showed at the beginning? History may not repeat, but it damn sure rhymes. I love this book. This region, then known as the Northwest, was where Harrison earned his reputation as a genocidaire. He made his career in the so-called Northwest Indian War. He fought at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. And man, that's 2 years after my fifth great grandfather was born. My fifth great grandfather was born in 1792, and this happened in 1794. Interesting. And was a signatory of the 1795 Treaty of Greenville, which forced Indians to cede their lands to American settlement. The land that is present-day Indiana thereafter experienced a significant influx of white settlers. Harrison was eventually appointed governor of the Indiana Territory, where he tried to legalize slavery in 1805 and in 1807. This was in direct contradiction of Article 6 of the ordinance that brought the territory into being in 1797. Quote, "There shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in said territory otherwise than in punishment of crimes whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, provided always that any person escaping into the same, from whom labor or service is lawfully claimed in any one of the original states, such fugitive may be lawfully reclaimed and conveyed to the person claiming his or her labor or service as aforesaid." End quote. But like slaveholders everywhere, he didn't let small things like the law get in his way. Besides, the article was not retroactive. The old French settlers had held slaves for years and had no intention of giving them up. And so Harrison tried to build upon the already existing practice. And people are like, "Where's your last name from? It sounds French." In 1802, Harrison informed the Congress that a very large majority of the citizens wanted to repeal Article 6 and that a convention would be called to formalize that desire. The Vincennes Convention was held on Christmas Day, and resulted in a resolution to suspend Article 6 for 10 years, pending congressional approval. Congress denied the request, but Harrison didn't give up. It should be noted that Congress's primary focus with respect to territories becoming states was to maintain the balance between slaves and free states. Ending slavery was not their objective. It was a balance. You could say it was bipartisanship. Oh, Jesus. As governor of Indiana, Harrison adopted from other states legislation that denied legal rights to non-whites and attempted to circumvent anti-slavery sentiment. A law passed on September 20th, 1803, denied Negroes, mulattoes, and Indians the right to testify against whites in courts. Now, just for some of you who don't know, mulattoes are people who are half white and half black, or half European and half African American, Black American. So that's what that is. And an 1805 law made it legal to bring slaves to Indiana and convert them to indentured servants. Slaves marked an X on a document that made them indentured servants for a specified period of time or indefinitely. Children inherited their parents' indentured status for a period of at least 2 years. White settlement had not yet driven out the indigenous population, but as territorial governor of Indiana, Harrison set out to change that. Accommodationist Indian leaders agreed to sell thousands of acres to the new territory, hoping to save something for their people. Tecumseh and his brother, let me make sure I get this name right, Tenskwatawa, then led the Confederation of Tribes in resistance and attempted to get British support against the Americans. Harrison led his forces against Tenskwatawa in 1811 at what came to be known as the Battle of Tippecanoe, a victory that inspired the song used in Harrison's 1840 presidential campaign, Tippecanoe and Tyler Too. As the indigenous population was driven out, the 1805 Act undermined what had been considered a ban on slavery in the territory. Harrison was a slaveholder his whole life, and is said to have fathered 6 children with an enslaved woman named Dulcia. Oh, this black person is the descendant of slave owners. Yeah, but that's not that's not what you think it is. It's not like, oh, they fell in love and everything was consensual. Okay, some assault was involved. That's why people like me have European also in my blood. And don't think it was just the female slaves that were also messed with. It was the male slaves that also were too. And they also forced male slaves to breed with female slaves in order for the females to have more children. So these were unwanted pregnancies that were forced upon them. So yeah, that happened. The more you know. One of their descendants of Dulcia was Walter White, who served as chairman of the NAACP from 1931 until his death in 1955. The attempts to change the Northwest Ordinance anti-slavery provisions failed for the simple reason that there were more non-slaveholding whites than slaveholders. Slaveholding settlers simply went farther west to Missouri and Arkansas, where they faced no legal jeopardy. Those who were not slaveholding went to the Northwestern territories precisely to escape slaveholding powers whose system diminished their ability to thrive economically. Now, this is an interesting point because the thing is, like, a lot of white people who didn't own slaves, they moved northwest to avoid the slave owning states, because if you're in an area where the plantation owner, the slave master, owns slaves, if you're a white man, especially, there's only really one job you can really have in a plantation, and that would be an overseer, right? But those were far few in between, because you only need maybe like 1, 2, or 3 overseers, right? For a bevy of slaves, chattel slaves, right? So they had to have other jobs, but if the jobs were more scarce because you didn't have the necessary skills, outside of working on a plantation, well, you were doomed to poverty. So you would move to the north where slavery was not legal. So then you can actually have a better job, because you wouldn't have to compete against chattel slaves for the same work, because they basically were competing with people who were paid absolutely nothing. So the slave owners would basically go, do I own slaves and not have to pay anything for the work that they do? Or do I hire this white guy and have to pay him a fair wage for the work that I want done on the plantation? Well, guess what? Capitalism is basically the slave owner's the means is the owner of the means of production. And the means of production is not only the land, but also the property is also the slave. So basically, if your property is working for your property, so therefore you don't have to actually pay an actual worker to get any labor done. So your means of production is working for your means of production. So it's basically almost like a set it and forget it. So they're making and raking in all the dough from the cotton, the sugar, the tobacco, the rice. And so they don't need these white guys that don't own any slaves. You don't own a slave, then step off, kick rocks. So then what do? They go up north, right? So it wasn't because, they hated slavery. It was because they didn't want to compete with somebody else for the jobs. And that reminds me of immigration. Because what's interesting? How you have both parties now. They'll talk about, we want to, fix illegal immigration. We don't stop, what's going on at the border. But the funny part is that they never actually stop it. It's like you have a busted pipe in the house, right? And you keep trying to wrap tape around it. You keep trying to seal the pipe. But in order to get the water to stop coming out, what do you have to do to stop the water from coming out the busted pipe? You got to shut off the main water line. But the issue is they never stop shutting off the main water line. And that's not shutting down the border. No, because they'll keep coming. Here's the thing. And by the way, they never actually really shut down the border anyway. What they don't do is they don't stop the source, which is, and let's point it out, the destabilization, the sanctions, the blockades, and all these things that happen that our government does in these other countries down south and in these states from Central and South America. And so then they come here, right? Because out of desperation for what our country's doing to them, and they're desperate in their country because it's destabilized, and they come here in order to be able to be exploited. They get paid less because they're afraid to get deported. And guess what? Since they're making less money, who wants to hire them? The corporations do. because they don't have to pay us, actual citizens, any money because they're going to get the jobs that we want to compete for. And so they're going to get exploited, and then we're going to get left in the lurch. So it's the same thing from back in the 17 and 1800s today. Today. All because capitalism has not changed its tactics. It's just got more modernized. And so, of course, there's some white people back in the day who hated black people because even though we were the ones being exploited, we were also the ones taking all the jobs. See? History may not repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. Right? And now you got a lot of black people saying the same thing. Well, the immigrants are taking all of our jobs. We need to close the border so we can actually have our jobs again. And now black people are becoming the same types. Whiteness isn't actually a color. Whiteness is really just an identity. Negroes are becoming white. Harrison was caught in the triangle when he ran for Congress in the neighboring state of Ohio in 1822. Knowing of the free soil anti-slavery sentiment there, he fashioned himself as an abolitionist. Quote, I am accused of being friendly to slavery from my earliest youth on to the present moment. I have been an ardent friend of human liberty. At the age of 18, I became a member of the Abolition Society established in Richmond, Virginia, the object of which was to ameliorate the condition of slaves and procure their freedom from every illegal means, end quote. That statement came back to haunt him during the 1840 presidential election. Political expediency forced him to backpedal and deny the sentiments he had expressed nearly 20 years earlier. This is when William Henry Harrison pulls a Kamala Harris. This is what he says. In answer to the inquiry why I use the word abolition in designating a society of which I was a member in Richmond in the year of 1791, instead of the word humane, which is known to be the one by which the society was really distinguished, all that I can say upon the subject is that if I did term it an abolition society, a fact in which I hardly believe, for I have not been able to see the paper containing my address to the people of the district in 1822, it must have been forgetfulness, yet which might easily happen after a lapse of 21 years. At any rate, abolition was not understood to mean in 1822 what it now means. What the fuck? You mean to tell me that you said abolition 20 years ago, and then you're like, oh, it doesn't mean what it means today? Yes, it does. $202 years later, it still means the same thing. 202 years later, it's still abolition. Kamala Harris ain't the first one to flip-flop, y'all. William Henry Harrison was the one to do the Kamala Dramala, the flip-flop. Said, like the early other presidents, Harrison expanded U.S. territory, drove the indigenous population from their homelands, and fought to expand slavery. His legacy was forged many years before his very brief presidency. Those actions were significant and helped set the stage for conflict and eventually civil war. That's William Henry Harrison. Boy, I'm telling you, it's crazy, crazy, crazy times we're living in. Should have got some liquor. Number 10, John Tyler. All right, let's get into this. William Henry Harrison died 1 month after his inauguration, and John Tyler became the first president to hold office who had not been elected. He became known by the moniker His Excellency. Tyler's biographical information invariably describes him as coming from an old Virginia family. Old is a covert way of saying slaveholding, and the Tylers fit that definition. Tyler never backed away from viewing slavery as a benevolent institution. As a member of Congress, he voted against the Missouri Compromise because it established that the federal government could, in fact, regulate slavery. While others in his economic class welcomed the coming of another slave state to the Union, Tyler never considered compromising. He served only 1 term as president, but he made good use of his time by completing the annexation of Texas before he left office. He succeeded in part by spreading an obvious lie about British plans to annex the Republic of Texas and turn it into a haven for runaway slaves. The annexation question went through various permutations. Under one plan, it was to be admitted not as 1 state, but 2, 1 free and 1 slave. Other proposals called it to be split into as many 5 states, increasing slaveocracy representation. Tyler sought help to make the case for annexation from Senator Robert Walker. Walker was born in Pennsylvania but settled in Mississippi and represented that state. He wisely decided not to make the case for annexation by advocating for an expansion of slavery. Instead, he wrote, claiming the annexation would result in the end of slavery. He penned a 32-page pamphlet titled Letter of Mr. Walker of Mississippi relative to the annexation of Texas. Walker argued that Texas would be a safety valve for the internal colonization of Black people who might become a labor force for Mexico and the rest of Central America. He claimed that Texas annexation would eventually empty the United States of Black people and make the country all white. His idea appealed to Northerners who feared the presence of Black people. It helped the slaveocracy by covertly assisting their plan to create another slave state. So yes, a lot of Black people, who were free, a lot of white people in northern states, they were scared. Why? Well, think about how they were treated. Think about if they were free, what they would do or could do. The Texas annexation was a classic case of wink, wink that allowed all parties to lie. Northerners had an out since they were able to pretend that another slave state was not being added to the Union. Southerners went along with the insincere scenario so as to get what they wanted. James Polk's victory in the fall of 1844 was considered a mandate for expansion. When all was said and done, the Texas annexation bill was passed and Tyler signed it into law with only 2 days left in office. Later, Tyler became a member of the Confederate Congress. In retrospect, Tyler is generally regarded as one of the less influential and less effective presidents. He was not elected and did not campaign for the office himself. Yet, annexing Texas was a tremendous political victory, and he ought to be regarded as a president who succeeded in enhancing the worst aspects of American colonization. Texas annexation was a huge victory for the slaveocracy, reason enough for history to not treat Tyler kindly. Presidents are sometimes considered successful if they get what they want, and Tyler got something very important that he desired. Acknowledging that fact as a reminder of American presidents' pro-slavery stance. So yeah, that's James Tyler. So without him, you'd probably never have Texas. So we're moving on to our last one. James K. Polk. There's a Polk County here in Florida, by the way, that might have been named after him. I'm not exactly sure. I didn't research that though, but 1845 to 1849. So, James K. Polk. The doctrine of manifest destiny expressed their belief that the United States had a right, indeed a duty, to expand its territory across North America. The term was coined by journalist John L. O'Sullivan, who in 1845 advocated for the annexation of the Republic of Texas. Texas had been a Mexican territory until Anglo settlers forcibly broke it away in 1836. Despite all their noble positions about liberty, those settlers wanted to maintain slavery, which Mexico had abolished. Slavery was again in the focus of debate in Texas in 1845. Each time a new state sought admission into the Union, the delicate topic of whether it would be a slave or free soil emerged. The election of James K. Polk in 1844 played a pivotal role in the future events. Polk had an expansionist mindset, and because he was a slaveholder, he had a clear bias regarding the issue. Think about NATO. Everything just keeps coming back, like modern day, versus back then. How they're trying to expand NATO to Ukraine, and then really the expansion is really to take over countries like Russia, right? And that expansionist mindset, through corporate means, because really it's the corporations that control our government, it's really corporate means so that they can take over and basically use Russia as a puppet, or have a president as a puppet, so that they can extract resources from Russia in order to enrich themselves. So that's basically the expansionist mindset. That's modern day. Is the expansion of things like NATO, right? I think it was Gorbachev who was promised that, not Gorbachev. Yeah, I think it was Gorbachev that was promised that NATO wouldn't expand 1 inch to the east past Germany. But the problem was they actually lied to Gorbachev and expanded it, as far as to Poland, I think it was. So when it comes to the expansionist mindset, that expansionist mindset is still, it's still around to this day. The thing is that the expansionists are not necessarily being done by necessarily government means. It's more corporate influence that's using the government to expand, versus back then it was more expansions on this particular land where it was done by slave owners and the owners of the means of production. Well, really still the owners of the means of production, but different types of means of production, right? So yeah, but yeah, that's pretty interesting. Okay, so James K. Polk. Let's see. Polk was raised in Northern California and Tennessee. His father was a farmer whose estate included about 53 slaves, 9 of whom the future president inherited. The future president also inherited 24 human beings when his grandfather died. And he purchased cotton plantations in Tennessee and Mississippi. He regularly purchased young people between the ages of 12 and 21 to work as his unpaid laborers. Polk's nomination as the Democratic Party's candidate for president was an explicit effort to increase the power of the Southern slaveocracy. Polk's offenses began before his election in 1844. As Speaker of the House of Representatives, he was the supporter of the gag rule. Every year, abolitionist groups sent petitions urging the slavery to be abolished in the nation's capital. These entreaties were apparently too much for the slaveocracy's gentle sensibilities. Supporters of the gag rule contended that the framers of the Constitution believed that slavery should never be debated by Congress. The last instance of the rule was not lifted until 1844, the year Polk was president. So really, it's states' rights, right? Polk oversaw the doubling of U.S. territory when Mexico lost 55% of its land through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War in 1848. That was 100 years before the Nakba in Palestine. Mexico lost 55% of its territory in 1848, and then in 1948, Zionists decided to take over the land of Palestinians. And they took over, was it like 55%? Holy shit. History does not repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. Man. The states of California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and portions of Wyoming and Colorado had all been part of Mexican territory. Westward expansion was dressed up with talk of manifest destiny, of a benevolent nation. It was so-called civilized power that wielded the hammer. Does this remind you of a particular country that is not real? Polk and others hoped to expand America's slaveholding into a newly claimed territory stolen from the Native Americans. As with his predecessors, Polk engaged in the expansionist tactics that resulted in genocide. As a slave owner, he has never been called to account fully for his self-interested behavior, perpetuating the practice of slavery. In fact, he explicitly avoided public disclosure of his personal slaveholding activities. Just 3 weeks after the war with Mexico began, he wrote to his brother-in-law, who was charged with buying more hands for Polk's Mississippi plantation. It should not be made public that you're making purchases for me. While Polk cultivated an image of disinterest, the Free Soilers publicly opposed expanding slavery into any new territories that might be acquired in a war with Mexico. Congressman David Wilmot of Pennsylvania sponsored legislation known as the Wilmot Proviso shortly after the Mexican War began in 1846. Had it become law, the Wilmot Proviso would have prevented the expansion of slavery into any territory acquired from the war. Wilmot made it clear that he had no morbid sympathy for the slave. He favored snatching Mexican land, but only where the sons of toil of my own race and own color can live without the disgrace which association with Negro slavery brings upon free labor. Polk countered with yet another compromise, harking back to 1820. The president suggested that the land of slavery continue at 36 by 30 degrees latitude, which would allow slaveholding in Southern California, New Mexico, and Arizona, while leaving Northern California, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, and Nevada slavery free. Ultimately, both the compromise and the Wilmot Proviso failed, and none of the states acquired in the Mexican War allowed slavery. The slaveocracy, having defeated the Wilmot Proviso, would continue their legislative victories the following year with the passage of the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act. Polk, like his predecessors, who also supported the expansion of slavery and protection of slaveocracy rights, ultimately helped destroy the institution they sought to preserve. Northern opposition to the Fugitive Slave Act would move the nation closer to war. So yeah, it's very interesting stuff, and you need to study history in order to prevent from repeating the same mistakes. Those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. And the thing is, it's like we're seeing that repeated right now across the ocean. And the same genocide that's happening over there is 500 years old here. 500 years old. So do I think it's appropriate that protesters against the genocide are also protesting at a Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade? You bet your ass. Yes. I think it's quite appropriate. Because ultimately, what do our native indigenous folks here, what are they saying? They're saying it's really a celebration of our genocide. And so, yeah, I mean, ultimately, when you think about this country, it's really near its end. And I'm getting to the point where I'm realizing that if fascism is really the shaking hands of corporate power with government, corporations are just really just the companies, with a very small few owning the means of production, basically shaking hands or in control of the government. Well, what do you think the first presidents were? They were slave owners. They were the owners of the means of production. And then they were also the heads of government. Meaning that from its outset, from the first president in 1776 to now, it has been fascist. This nation was born fascist. That's where Germany got it from, because they learned it from here. So when people say you can't really vote out fascism, you can't, because this nation was born that way. And fascism shakes hands with capitalism. History is interesting, right? Man, I'm going to get you guys in the chat because I'm actually quite curious as to what you guys think regarding this, because it's fascinating. But before we do that, go ahead and give the stream a like. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I also want to give a shout out to patrons on Patreon, because without you guys, I would not be able to do this work, because you guys make this absolutely possible. And I really thank you. I want to thank you. So let me share and show the tiers. So we have Mega Jaybefaunters, Super Duper Jaybefaunters, Super Jaybefaunters, Jaybefaunters, Comrades, Solidarity, and JB members. And of course, I gave a shout out to this person already, but new members, thank you very much. Any future new members, without you guys, I would not be able to keep the lights on. So thank you very, very, very much. All right, let's go into the comments in the chat. And then after that, we can head on out. So let me check to see if I have any Rumble rants. To see there. We are good on the Rumble side. So we're good there. And we're good on the Rockman side. All right, so let's go into the chat to say hello. All right, so we have Charles coming in saying, Charles J, hey, from one J to another. Good to see you. Pitchforks are coming, says capitalism sucks. Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Matt John says, blessing rad fam. Good to see you, Matt John. Nice to have you. Thank you very much. Charles J says, some liquor is crazy. Yeah. Sometimes I feel like I need it, because reading some of this stuff, I'm just like, damn. But it's all good. We have Martin Rad says, I believe the USS was founded for the rich. You're right. And so, of course, it's going to keep its same objective, from its outset, because you basically had it uneven, and it's going to stay uneven. It's just like, it's like having a cake pan, right? And if you put a dent in that cake pan, every single cake that you bake is going to come out dented, right? You need to either do one or two things. You need to either throw out that pan, or you need to get and then make that pan, straighten it out. Now, you're probably going to have to take that pan and put some fire on it to soften it, to straighten it out, right? It's not going to be pretty, but that's what you need to do in order to straighten out that cake pan. The thing is that this cake pan has been dented since its outset. So either one or two things need to happen. Either some fire needs to happen to straighten it out, or this entire cake pan needs to be thrown out. One or two things is going to happen. Get the torches ready. So yeah. And thank you very much to Charles J. Says thank you for reading. Thank you very much for listening or watching. Appreciate it very much. All right. So, of course, I'm going to be doing other readings of my other books. It fell way back there. So stay tuned for that. So, of course, I'll be doing the reading for A Water in the Spirit by Melodoma Patrice Somé later this week. And as well as The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love by Bell Hooks. So I'll be getting into those a little bit later. I just wanted to do a live reading because, number one, I haven't done one for Prejudential in a little bit. But also, it's a holiday, so why not? And a few people may want to catch, a stream for reading. And I thought it'd be very interesting. So with that being said, I just want to thank you guys again for tuning in. Look, it's going to be an interesting day. It's going to be an interesting weekend. I had to postpone the stream with Richard Medhurst. It's not going to be this Saturday, but it's going to be the next Saturday instead because he's not feeling well, and I wish him a speedy and easy recovery. And with that being said, be sure to tune in. What do I have going on this Tuesday? I think this Tuesday is hang on. I think I have a guest for Tuesday. Let me make sure. Yes. So Jason Call, who was the campaign manager for Dr. Joe Stein, will be joining me on Tuesday. So just found out. So yes, so you guys will get to tune in to that, and we'll be talking about news stories and post-mortem election stuff. So I think it's going to be a great conversation to have. So be sure to tune into that. Also, the JB show this Sunday. So we're going to have that conversation. We're going to be talking about news stories on the JB show. So I cannot wait to do that. And then next Thursday, because today's the last Thursday of the month, but because today's a holiday, RBN Roundtable is going to be next week instead. So be sure to tune into that. I think we're going to be having a guest, so stay tuned to that as well. And by the way, if you guys have not already, just wanted to share this as well. Of course, we are still making sure to make sure I find it, to help Rome. He is incarcerated right now. He's trying to get legal support, and we raised the funds for the attorney. But if you would like to send money for him to get money for his commissary, so he can have some money for his commissary, please make sure to donate to the GoFundMe. Also, if you guys would like to, you guys can try to go through his Tour for the Poor Cash App. It's just $ Tour for the Poor. You guys can also do that as well. But I am not at liberty to discuss anything legally. But if you guys can, please make sure to send him a few dollars his way so that he can survive while being incarcerated. So thank you very much. And I will also put the link for this in the chat as well, so you guys can share that and donate as well, because we miss him. So there you go. And yes, Roger, it's not chapters, but I read parts 8 through 11. So 8 through 11, let me see. I started off with Martin Van Buren, and then we went from Martin Van Buren to James K. Polk. So I just finished reading. So yeah. I started at 3. But yes, with that being said, everybody, I'm going to head on out. So like I always say, I got to do that too. Water your plants. I got to do that today. Water yourselves. Leave the world better than you found it. Do all the things if you got them. Smoke if you got them. Drink if you got them. If you ain't got them, then watch something hilarious, because joy is revolutionary. Also, if you guys have any questions, just go ahead and submit them to Q Bounty, because I literally do video answers and reactions on their specific questions that you guys may have. That's also really cool. This is great apparatus to have reactions, and this is kind of almost like having a super chat, giving a super chat and asking a question, and then you get a video answer, or you have me reacting. So this is the latest one I did earlier today, that I did, with Q Bounty. Just list these. Let me just go back here. So I actually reacted to a video that was submitted to me as well. So
there's a general sense that when it comes to the world of podcasts, alternative media, I don't even know what you want to call it, that Trump did a much better job with.
So you guys have that, right? So I was able to do a reaction to that. So if you guys would like to, then you guys have that there. That's actually linked at the top of the chat as well. And you guys will get reaction from me. So thank you very much. All right. So I'm going to head on out. Thank you very much. Mwah, forehead kisses, because that's the kind of guy I am. You guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you guys over the weekend. Deuces, Bruces. Thank you so very much for watching my channel, and I deeply appreciate it from the top and bottom of my heart. If you wish to support the channel further, so I can keep bringing you content that is educational and informative, you can become a patron on patreon.com/Jaybefaunt. You can find that link in the pinned comment or in the description below. No matter what you give, you'll be supporting independent media and education that helps make the world better. Thank you so much, and you can watch more of my content here. Mwah. Forehead kisses, and have a beautiful day.